a more comforting way to look at it. Oh, we're ready?
Yep.
Okay, so we're ready to get started. If we could just start by having you say your name and then spell it for us.
Vanis Daniels. Vanis Daniels. And that's the second.
Thank you. My name's Laura Arata. It's November 14th, 2013, and we are conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. So I wonder if we could just start by having you tell us a little bit about when you first arrived at Hanford, who you came with, where you came from, that initial experience.
Oh boy. I arrived, well, let's say I arrived in the Tri Cities. My dad came here in 43 uh, and worked here off and on until 51 when he moved the family here. Now, between the time he first came here in 43, he, my uncle, and a cousin of ours helped pour the first mud that was poured at B reactor to start the B reactor. And then after that, he worked here off and on until 51. Well, 51 when he bought the family out, and I was just a little, barely a teenager when I came here in 51. I was a sophomore in high school. I graduated. I was supposed to graduate in 1954. At that time, you had to be 17 and a half years old in order to graduate from high school. Well, see, I was just turning 16. So then, when I got ready to graduate, the vice principal came to me and he says, "You can't graduate." I said, "Why can't I graduate?" He said, "You're not old enough." I said, "Old? What's that got to do with graduation?" He said, "You're only 16. You have to be 17 and a half years old to graduate from high school." Well, it didn't make any sense to me. You know, if I got the grade point and all that and able to graduate, and he say, "Well, let me ask you a question." I says, "Yes." He says, "If you graduate, what are you going to do for the next year and a half?" I said, "I don't know." He say, "You're not old enough to get a job. Nobody's going to hire you." He say, "So you're just going to be whiling away your time?" I say, "Well, I guess." He says, "I tell you what, I'll make a deal with you." He say, "You come back to school next year." He say, "Because you're not going to be doing anything." He say, "You can come as many hours as you want to. If you can find you a little part-time job or something like that, you're free to leave to go and work. And you don't have any restrictions on you, as far as having to be there every day." I told him, okay. So that's what I did. But that's when I really started appreciating school. Because up until that point, I had been an A student, but where I came from Texas, by the way. I was born in a place called Terrell, Texas, but that's all I know about it. We moved to East Texas, which is a little place called Kildare, which is right out of Texarkana. I personally lived in Oklahoma during those 8 or 10 years that I was there, and then back to Texas, and then to the Tri-Cities here. But being from the South, I went to an all black school, segregated. And I didn't know anything about interacting with other races. And when I came here, nobody gave you a, I wouldn't call it a crash course, but I'd say interaction. Uh, there's a name for it. But anyway, they just threw you into the school with everyone else, and you had to learn to adjust. Well, that can be kind of hard, and it can also be kind of devastating. So my grade point dropped, but not to the point where I didn't graduate. Uh, and I see some kids right now that I went to school with that I see them every once in a while. And if they hadn't been there to sort of support me, hold me up, I might would have fallen all the way through the crack. I might would have dropped out of school altogether. But they were, let's see, one retired from Franklin County. I don't know what the other two girls, three girls did as far as work go. But for some reason, they sort of took me under their wing and I guess boost my morale or whatever you want to call it. And I was able to transition in and go on and finish school. Okay, after I finished school, I tried for 10 years, 12 years really, to get a job at Hanford. And for some reason, they didn't want to hire me. I went to Seattle, tried to get a job at Boeing. They didn't want to hire me. I have later in life, since I've retired, I learned why I couldn't get, I didn't get a job at Hanford or Boeing as far as that go. The people that I thought would be my biggest asset became my biggest enemy as far as getting a job, because when you're asked for references and you put people down, I asked them if I could put them down. I let them know that I was putting them down for references and all this stuff. But the things that they put down there hindered me from getting a job rather than helping me get a job. And I learned this since I've retired. But needless to say, I worked construction. I finally got a job, an interview for Battelle. My singer was his name that interviewed me. And I must have gone out there for an interview the better part of a dozen times. And every time I'd go, he'd tell me, well, we don't have anything right now. In June of '66, he called me for an interview and I went out. And I'm working every day, working construction. When you leave work on construction, that's when your pay stops. I had a wife and a kid by then. And I went out one evening because he told me, he said, I'll stay here until 7 o'clock. You get off work, you come out. I told him, okay. So I got off, went home, took a shower, went out, talked with him. And I think he was about to tell me that he didn't have a position. And till I told him, I said, let me tell you something. I said, now, if you're not going to hire me, tell me now, because I can't keep making arrangements, taking off work, and all that stuff, coming out here just to sit and talk with you. I need a job. He says, just a minute. I don't know who he left the room. He went and talked with someone. When he came back, he say, when can you come to work? I said, well, whenever you want me to. He said, can you come Thursday? I told him yes. So I went out on Thursday. They interviewed me, gave me a permit, which was a red badge at the time, to go to work. I started as a janitor in the 3706 and 3707 building in the 300 area. They transferred me from there to 2 East and 2 West. From 2 East and 2 West, they gave me a job in what was called decon at the time. We did all of the glassware, all of the pigs, which is not a literal pig, it's a iron cast. You know, you can get the gallon, a half gallon of quartz, and it contains radioactive waste on the inside, and that the pig is just to shield the radiation. And we handled all of the hot water from the 300 area. So I worked in there for 2.5 years or so, and we took care of all the waste, did all the filter changing and everything in the 300 area. From there, I went to 100F to inhalation toxicology. Man, inhalation toxicology is just a matter of inhaling. It's inhaling and exhaling is what it is. But I worked with the dogs, which at the time Battelle was doing an experiment on the effect that cigarette smoke had on the human body. We worked with beagle dogs because at that time they say that the closest thing to a human's physique was the beagle. A grown-up beagle weighs anywhere from 15 pounds to, I think the heaviest one we had was probably 47 pounds, which is a wide range for a dog, but it's all, the human anatomy is also a wide range. 15-pound dog would be equivalent to a 130-pound man. A 47-pound dog would be equivalent to a 350-pound man. And every 3 months, we sacrificed a dog. And we did everything from blood, urine, feces, muscles, tissue, everything. We learned everything we could about the cigarette smoke, on what effect it would have on the dogs. The dogs smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Now, we had dogs that got addicted to cigarettes, and they were just like humans. Chain smoke, if you allowed them to. Then you had dogs that could not stand smoke, period, and they would fight it all the way through. But you had to give them the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Okay, we had hamsters that we shammed smoke with cigarette smoke. We also did plutonium on them to see what effect it would have on the organs on the inside of the body. And I worked in there until I got kind of fed up with supervision at the time, because we weren't getting the raises that we should as far as finances go. And when you got a family you got to take care of, $2 just don't get it. So meanwhile, I talked with supervision, and they say they didn't have money for raises. but yet and still they are turning back money every year to DOE, which was set aside for raises. They just weren't giving it out. Well, at that time they had what they call merit raises, and I worked second shift. I very seldom saw my supervisor. And so I asked him, I say, if I very seldom see you, I must be doing a good job, because otherwise you should be here checking on me to see what I'm doing. I later learned that one of the guys that worked in my department had told him that he had to recheck all of my work every morning when he came in to make sure that I was doing it right. Well, see, that wasn't his position. He's an employee like I am. The other thing is that if the supervisor had just used a little bit of common sense, he would have known the man was lying. Because when you pull samples, the minute you pull the sample, it starts to decay. Now, you would have had some variation in my results and his results if he's going to run my sample the next morning to tell me that I'm not doing it right. And he's getting the same results. I'm getting something wrong with this picture. Well, anyway, as it turned out, I told them I couldn't work for them if that's the way they were going to do things. So I quit. The day I left from out there, I went home, and I was sitting at home, and I was thinking, boy, I just quit my job. I got to get me a job. I went up to my sister's house, and my brother-in-law was home, and I said, what are you doing home? He said, today is Veterans Day, and also it used to be Election Day, the 11th of November. And he said, I'm off. And so we sat around there and talked for a few minutes. He said, would you be interested in leaving Hanford and going to work someplace else? He didn't know I'd quit. I said, why, sure. He said, I got a guy you need to go and see. He told me where it was and everything. And the next day, I went looking for it. I drove right by the office and didn't find it. I went back, and when he came in from work, I said, he said, you passed right by it. He said, it's a little building. I says, okay. The next day I went. My the guy that became my supervisor wasn't in, but the secretary knew who I was when I got there. And so I didn't get to see him that day, but the next day they told me what time to come back. I went back. I walked in the door. He says, so you're looking for a job? I said, yes, I am. He says, come on back here in my office. So we went back to his office, and meanwhile he's talking, asking me some questions. He say, I know your brother-in-law real well. He say, you're a heck of a nice guy. I say, he did? He say, yeah. When we get in the door and he closed the door, he say, you got the job if you want it, but I got to go through the motion of interviewing you. I says, okay. So I worked there at the tank farm in Pasco, which we distributed petroleum products, fertilizers, and what else? Fire retardant for our forest fires. And I worked there just 2 or 3 months shy of 16 years. I went back to Hanford after that and went to work for Westinghouse. From there, Bechtel took over. I became supervisor. I worked in every area out there, decommissioning all of the buildings, the outer buildings, 105s, tore down the 103s, basins, you name it, we did it. Took care of all the asbestos. I worked in the asbestos department of the tank farms that they are talking about now, where the tanks are leaking and all that stuff. We took care of all the above ground asbestos and stuff there for them. And I worked there until I retired in 97.
What year was this that you quit your job, your first job with Battelle?
In 71.
And so then what year was it that you went back to work at Hanford for Westinghouse?
89.
Well, it sounds like you had quite an array of jobs between all those sites.
I've done some more besides that. I owned my own restaurant for a little while in Spokane out at Airway Heights. I went in the service. I was at my basic training in Fort Ord, California. When I finished my advanced basic, I had run into a captain. I didn't know him, but I knew his family from Pasco. And I was talking to him, and I had been home on leave, and I had seen his mother. And I was telling him that she was doing fine. I'd just seen her and all that stuff. And he, when I finished my advanced basic, he was there, and he asked me, he says, I got several places you can go if you want to. He said, which ones do you want? I could have gone to a special forces in Chicago. I didn't think I wanted to go there. It'd get too cold there for me. I could have gone to Presidio in San Francisco. I don't like San Francisco. I could have gone to Germany. I didn't want to go at that time. I could have gone to Fort Lauderdale, or I could have gone to Fort Lewis. I chose Fort Lewis. So I went there, and I liked Fort Lewis for some reason, although we were in the field most of the time, but I'm an outdoor person anyway. We got transferred from Fort Lewis to Germany. At the same time, the Vietnam War was breaking out. They took all of our officers and sent them to Vietnam. They took all of the personnel that had 6 months or less left to do. They extended them a year and sent them to Vietnam. All of them that had a year or better to do went to Vietnam. I had 8 months left to do. So I didn't have to go, but they sent me from Germany back to Fort Lewis, and I trained the Milwaukee National Guard because they had activated them to take the Force Division's place when they sent them to Vietnam, and I was sent back to Fort Lewis to train the Milwaukee National Guard. Once I got them trained, I got discharged. 3 weeks after I got discharged, I got drafted again. But I didn't have to go. I didn't have to go. For some reason, they decided they didn't want me. And those are some of the jobs I've had and some of the things I've done.
There's about a million things I want to ask you about,
Well,
but we'll have to
go.
start somewhere. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about kind of some of your early memories when you first arrived in the Tri Cities area, and particularly I'm interested in what your housing situation was like, and where you lived, and
Oh,
what the community was like at that time.
okay. Uh, when we first arrived in the Tri Cities, coming from East Texas, where you got greenery all around you, it's like the west side of the state of Washington, and coming here to the desert, you just sort of get a sickening feeling, to tell you the truth. But if you were black, you lived on the east side in Pasco, where I still live. Well, I live northeast Pasco now, but that's by choice. Uh, Anything east or west, actually, of Second and Lewis in Pasco was all, well, it wasn't off limits. It was off limits